What we have today is 2 hours of some presentation and then a good bit of conversation in which you can share with each other ideas about your priorities for the renovated or new school. We had a workshop at the beginning of June with a group of about 25 teachers and students and administrators to establish some of the priorities. In the meantime, SMMA has been meeting with lots of teachers and people from the district in order to further their understanding of what the needs of the 2 schools that will be occupying this new education complex are. And what we wanted to do today is to share some of the highlights of the priorities that have been set so far, both educationally and architecturally, and to have you weigh in and give us your thoughts about that. And I'm going to have Kristen Olson from SMMA give you a little bit of an overview of the whole feasibility study process.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kristen Olson. I'm project manager and architect with SMMA. I just want to spend a quick 5 minutes letting you know that the MSBA school building project process is typically about a 5-year-long process, and we're in our first 6 to 8 months right now. This part is called the feasibility study, where your leadership from the educational team has gotten together, like David mentioned, to develop their plan and vision for the school, and then we gather community input, and all of that helps me and my team, Alex Pitkin and others who are at our office, develop the floor plan around your vision and the community's vision. So between April, when we first began, and December, when we'll be wrapping up the feasibility phase, we'll be doing very preliminary high-level studies to understand the cost, the size, the location, and things like that about the school, folding in the ideas that we hear from you today. After that, hopefully the community will support the project, and we'll move on into schematic design. And from there on out, we have about a 1 to 1.5 year design process. And after that, construction is typically a 2-year time frame. So this is kind of the foundation and the seed for the building project, and it's extremely meaningful to hear your thoughts and gather your input, because this is, in fact, the very beginning of the school project. And then looking forward, we'll, in a few years, have a beautiful building for you, for the Oliver students. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, I'd just like to say, if people have questions along the way, please raise your hand and we will try and address them. So for today, what we want to do is give you some highlights. I'm going to move over here because the speaker over there is echoing my ears. We want to give you some highlights of the priorities that have been set so far. So my experience, I do a lot of work with the Mass School Building Authority. They are the public entity that's helping to fund this process and the project. And they want to make sure that when we design a new school building, it will be able to last many decades into the future, because these are very expensive projects. And we're doing a lot of thinking as educators and architects about how schools might be able to, or might need to change over the years, because we want to make sure to create environments that are flexible enough to handle different kinds of delivery and teaching and learning practices going on in the school. And I have a background as an architect, but more than that, I'm an educator. So I'm really coming at it from the educator's perspective. I worked for about 20 years as a teacher and assistant principal, but I also am very interested in how that connects to ideas about architectural design. So we're going to share some of those with you today and get your feedback. And this is part of a process that the MSBA requires on all the new buildings that they're helping to fund. They want to make sure we're looking at learning goals and best practices in education. What does it mean to be helping prepare our students to be ready to succeed after school in the workforce as well as in post-secondary education? What are the skills that they need? And are they changing because of the way the economy is changing? We want to connect those ideas to ways that schools might be used and spaces in schools might be used. And any new school or renovated school that's through the MSBA process is going to have a lot of good things about it. It's going to have good-sized classrooms. It's going to have lots of natural light. It will have enough bathrooms. It will have, if not air, it will have air conditioning or some kind of cooling so that you can use the building throughout the year. And it's going to have water fountains and sinks in the classrooms, and it will be a very comfortable place to be. So that's all the good news, and we also have other ways that we can think about using buildings to make them as flexible as possible, because with technology now and wireless infrastructure, if we have a good wireless infrastructure in the school, every square inch of the building can be used, not just the classrooms. And so those are some of the things we want to be thinking about. So we're going to start with an activity around priority goals, and I'm going to share some of the goals that have been established already. And then each of you have a handout with an agenda, but also a form that you can fill out. And we'd love to collect these at the end. So we're going to ask you to please write clearly so that we can understand what your ideas are. And we're going to give you an opportunity to also talk about these priorities at your tables, and then we can share some of them, but we'll also be collecting them, because a lot of this process is about collecting as much information as possible about the school and the community and what your needs are, and how we can take most advantage of this process, because this is a really important process to design a new school and to make it, to help it serve you and the community and your children. So we'll talk about priority goals. We're going to talk a little bit about future-ready teaching and learning and what people are thinking about and why, and then we're going to see how that connects to ideas about space. So at your tables, you're going to have an opportunity to have discussions and give us feedback. So I'm going to start with some of the priority goals that have been established so far about the school. As I said, any new MSBA school is going to have, it's going to be a comfortable place physically, it's going to be handicapped accessible, and it's going to have comfortable and light-filled classrooms. Beyond that, here are some of the things that the community has been thinking about so far. Right up at the top of the list, a place that you want to be, a place that kids are excited to come to, that families are excited to be in, and that teachers are comfortable teaching in. Healthy, accessible, and comfortable building. More and more we're thinking about schools being accessible after hours and before school, after school, on weekends, and all throughout the year. So we want to make sure the building is really healthy and a comfortable place to be. Of course, an up-to-date school that has up-to-date technology and flexible furniture and all the kinds of things that a new building comes with. Another thing people have been thinking about is hands-on learning. There's definitely a lot of thinking about how important it is for kids to use their hands, not just their heads. So to be actually applying what they're doing in school, or what they're learning in school, to projects or things that relate to their own lives. And that's how we make things meaningful for students and get them engaged. Community access. We want to think about, in any new or renovated building, a part of the building that can be closed off from the classrooms but used on weekends as a community center type of place, or where the gym, where the cafeteria can be accessible to the community, where multi-purpose spaces can be accessible, so it really becomes a resource. And another thing that has been prioritized is the idea of having family support within the building, and possibly a resource room for families where you can come and find out information about services that are available and build community as well. Of course, we want to be thinking about security and safety in any new school. We know that we have to be able to control who comes into the school and when, and within the school, students need to feel safe. Good parking and traffic flow, very important. not always easy to do in terms of the parking part, but we're going to do what we can. And we're going to be thinking about safe drop-off and pickup, gathering in performance spaces where you can have musical performances or theatrical performances or big gatherings or games. Quiet spaces where kids can focus. One big difference in new schools these days is that there are more collaboration spaces where students can work together in teams, and we're looking at classrooms like that as well. But we also need places that are quiet rooms. And there's going to be a lot of rooms through the MSBA process that are assigned to special education or being a breakout room that is right next to a classroom where you can do groups, you can have small groups there, or you can do testing, or you can do some tutoring there, or you can just create a different environment for a student that needs to have a little bit of quiet at that point, but they're right next to the classroom. We want to be thinking also maybe about a school store that came up, a centrally located cafeteria, and also the idea of display and exhibition, being able to display student work throughout the building. Having indoor and outdoor play areas, we want to be thinking about how kids can move around and get their, and get their energy moving in between classes or during recess, or places that during cold weather where you can also do active play. We want to be thinking about age-appropriate play. And in a building that would be a K-8 building, an education complex, we want to be thinking about what that looks like for younger children and for older children. Good storage, we're always thinking about, we need good storage if we want that kind of flexibility. So storage within our classroom. So that's, those are the priorities, some of the priorities that have been established so far. We've got a website right here, and all of the notes from the meetings that we're having are going to be available on the website, as well as the slides that we'll be sharing here. So I'm going to quickly go through some ideas about how educators think about education changing these days, and what they want to prepare their students for in terms of the kinds of skills that they have. And then we're going to have a conversation about that at our tables. So we always think of the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And those are very important. They're still as important as they always have been. We also think about rigor, relevance, and relationship. And I'm going to really focus on relationship here, the importance of building relationship in schools so that kids feel like they are known well, because all kids have different learning styles and ways that they might be challenged in some ways or really good at things in other ways. So we want to be able to support kids where they're at. But the big emphasis right now, and when we think about 21st century skills, are things that have always been important, but they're especially important now. Critical thinking, learning how to developing your thinking process, and how to develop your ideas, and being confident about your ability to be a thinker. Communication, being able to communicate both verbally and also in writing. Collaborating, being able to work with other students, and being creative. Another big part, and these are all C's, we call them the 4 C's, and then there's citizenship. That's the 5th C that a lot of schools are really thinking about. How do we get kids to feel part of a larger community and the communities that they live in? So definitely schools are thinking about a lot of these things. We're moving, that went fast. Yeah, we're moving, from a more teacher-focused to more student-focused kind of classrooms. It's not just about the teacher being up at the front of the class. It's about students sometimes learning on their own or learning from each other. We're moving from more passive to active type of environments and flexible environments. So we want our furniture to be really flexible and the technology that we use to be flexible. And we're thinking that technology, of course, is going to continue to evolve. And so we want to use it as a tool in really effective ways and be sure that the school is prepared to do that. We're focusing on not just individual learning, but learning in groups And a lot of times there's a project-based kind of approach where kids are applying their learning to projects. And this all connects to the kinds of skills that employers are saying that they want entry-level workers to have, and that colleges are saying they want their kids to have. Being able to solve problems, having confidence in your ability to be a thinker, to be creative, to be able to interact with people. We sometimes call these social emotional skills, social emotional learning, and this is a whole kind of focus that we have on schools at the moment, and which is a good thing, because we want to make sure that kids are learning how to make responsible decisions, developing an awareness of how they fit into sort of the community, and their social interaction skills. So we really want to be working on that. Another focus is connecting to the real world. It used to be that schools were very separate from their communities, and now we're thinking we want to engage kids in the communities that they live in and have them have adult mentors within the community, and again, apply their learning. Oftentimes too, instead of teachers just teaching in their own classroom, we're thinking about teachers collaborating and team teaching and working as a team to get to know their kids well, and also deliver curriculum that feels like it's more connected for kids. A big difference is when we used to do special education or special services for students with different needs, we used to take them and what was called pull out. We would pull them out of the classroom and move them to a resource room at a different part of the school. Now we're trying to keep them in the classroom. That's called push in. And we're trying to create breakout spaces, these rooms right nearby classrooms, where kids don't have to get far to get the special help that they may need, and they don't have to feel different for being in that situation. We're, of course, in this community, especially focusing on English language learning and making sure that kids are comfortable with sort of the level of English, and also that they're again they're not separated out all the time, but they're mainstreamed in as much as possible into the larger classes. Technology integration is as I said, going to keep developing. One thing that I've seen happen over the years is that over the last few years is that we're actually kind of limiting in some ways how much technology kids are using in school, because they use so much of it outside of school, and especially younger kids. We want to be able to use technology as a tool for learning. And so part of that, what's great about technology is that it enables kids to actually produce a lot of stuff. So it's not just about them using technology, but about them using technology to create things. And we want to find ways that we can really engage every student. So when we met in June, the group there got together and they determined some of the things that were most important to them. And I wanted to share them with you and then have you talk about them at your tables. So right up at the top of the list, and this is again, we got together in small tables like this in June with about a group a little bit smaller than this even, and different groups came up with their lists of things that were most important, and this is what rose to the top. So social emotional learning, the ability to care about and show empathy for others, and developing a cultural awareness and being part of a community. The other thing is critical thinking. Again, that's a higher order thinking, being able to problem solve and being able to evaluate information. Third on the list was real world connection, being able to connect your learning to contexts that were outside of the school, and learning how to use tools, effective real world tools, and that could be technology. Leadership and teamwork, being able to develop collaboration, self-directed learning, and setting goals for yourself, and curiosity and creativity. And this came up a bunch, the idea that schools should be a joyful place, a place where kids feel really happy to be and excited and inspired. And then also success and failure. And we want to create environments where students feel like it's okay to try and fail, because that's how we all learn. So we want to make a safe environment for doing that. And finally, and this is kind of like connected to everything, is of course it's about mastery of academic content. We want kids to be learning the many curriculum standards that we're trying to teach them. But that's kind of like the base of everything. And what I'm going to share with you right now are the things that were prioritized in June by the group that did the workshop. So we shared about 50 different design patterns, and this is what was prioritized. These are the 20 or so that were prioritized by the group. And I'm actually showing them in order of which ones people thought were most important. And again, this was a group of administrators and teachers and students from both Up Academy Oliver and Oliver Partnership School. So the first one is a welcoming entry and reception area. And these are all pictures, many of them are MSBA schools that have been designed and built in the last 5 years. So we want to make sure that there's a welcoming entry area. Part of security is also being able to really monitor who comes into the school, but we also want it to feel friendly. We don't want to just, have kids come upon metal detectors, but as well, we also want them to see a friendly face. We also want them to see the adults that are there and that are handling the security. And we also want them to have a beautiful place to enter into. So this is a school where you see there's a screen, you can see things going on in the school, there's places to sit, you can see into where the cafeteria is. Another pattern that people talked about is having what we call clusters of learning. It's kind of like a neighborhood. So instead of just putting the classrooms along a corridor with nothing in between, we create a space like a little town square or a commons or a meeting space that connects the classrooms together. And what this creates is a community, and this could be a community of a grade level community of 5th grade students or 2nd grade students, and they meet with their teachers there and they all know each other, and then they have a place to gather. So we want to be thinking about how to group things together, and in that cluster we also want to put places for special education, bathrooms nearby, and places for storage. Another priority that came up is having gathering spaces and common spaces. So again, in addition to the classrooms, and this is really a way that schools have changed, we're not just thinking about classrooms and hallways. We're thinking about the spaces in between and how we can put furniture there and how we can use them to create more collaborative learning and work environments. And here's an example of a movable wall that goes from a classroom, and it opens right up, and it opens it into the hallway. So you don't just have to be in the classroom, you can be in that common space that's right outside as well. And you have visual access into these spaces. We want to be thinking about quiet spaces and pull-out spaces. As I said before, we don't want just to have a lot of collaboration going on. Kids need places where they can get quiet, where they can get focused, and so those might be like small breakout rooms and meeting rooms, and they might have things like whiteboard walls in them. We want to be thinking about cafetoriums and multi-purpose spaces. So that's like, this is a cafetorium and multi-purpose space, and we'll be thinking about how to create the best gathering spaces possible, make them as flexible as possible. And part of that is including a lot of good acoustics, so it's easy to hear within a space, and also technology, so you can do things like what we're doing here. Another pattern is branding and identity. That means we can think about color coding different parts of the building. So it might be orange, or it might be green, maybe the lockers are that color. Or using different materials so that it doesn't feel like one big building. It feels like there are small communities within the building, and kids really feel a sense of belonging to that community, depending on the grade that they're in. Safety and security. So it's interesting that, because I told you this priority list was developed by your teachers, administrators, and students, and safety and security came up on it, but it wasn't the very top thing. It's what we're hearing a lot about, and I know it's on your minds. Part of that, I think, is it's just a given. We know that any new school is going to have what we call a locked entry, right? So you have to get buzzed in to this entry and then buzzed in to this entry. And some schools, you have to actually enter through the administrative office even to get into the school. So we're going to be thinking about how to create that entry sequence that makes it as safe as possible. I talked before about community access. This is a school that was just built 2 years ago in New Bedford. And in this school, here, this is a plan looking down on the building. Here's the gym, here's the cafeteria and the stage and the music room. All of this area can be locked off from the rest of the school, and it can be used by the community on weekends and after school. So it's a really great resource for the community. In this school, this is where they also, right here, have a family resource center. And I should also, I want to, something I mentioned before about the school store, connected to that is the idea of Katie's Closet, the store that is presently in the program where there is, there's food and clothing that is available for free as a resource to the community. And so when we think about that family resource area here, that might be connected to this Katie's Closet. Greeting and gatekeeping. This is really connected to the idea of having a friendly face when you first enter, and having a place also when you first enter the school where you get an idea of all the things that are going on in the school. You might see student work or artwork. You might see notices about all the different things that are going on. Agile classrooms, flexible classrooms. That's something we think a lot about. How can we recreate classrooms that have flexible furniture so we can do more traditional kind of teaching, and we can also do more small group work, and we can also maybe even move all the furniture out and free up a large part of the classroom for doing different kinds of more hands-on activities. Any good new classroom is going to have lots of natural light, and we're going to be thinking about how to make the building as sustainable as possible in terms of energy efficiency. Here's another image of an Agile classroom. So we've got lots of natural light in here, but also blinds that can be pulled down. Here you can see that the furniture is really flexible. And we're also going to be thinking about multiple walls where you can have teaching going on. So it's not just one whiteboard. And here's some examples of flexible furniture. Part of this MSBA process is going to give you new technology and new furniture for the building. So we want to be thinking about what that furniture might look like. And then there's the idea of a learning commons or a media center. So the way we think about libraries has really changed a lot. They're not places that you're just quiet. Some schools spread their library around the school so that there's different reading areas around the school. Some have noisy areas and quiet areas. Some have things like maker spaces or STEAM labs, things like that. But in this meeting in June, we talked about the idea of the commons, the media center being kind of at the center of the school. The idea of this is an example of what we call distributed dining, and that means that we're going to have smaller cafeterias so kids don't feel so overwhelmed. So one idea is that you might have a middle school and a lower school cafeteria with a movable wall in between, so it could be one big space, but you could have smaller spaces as well. And we want to be thinking about how those dining spaces don't feel so overwhelming for kids, but maybe there are smaller areas where they can be, or more quiet areas. We want to be thinking about making the school child scale. That means for little kids, we want things that are little. including their toilets, right? We want to make it feel like it's appropriate to their size and their development level. We want professional work areas for teachers so that they have offices and places where they can collaborate, where they can also have meetings about students. Centralized enrichment spaces, so things like art rooms and music rooms and fitness rooms. We're going to think about how to put those all at the center of the school so you don't have to walk from one end of the school to the other to get at that. The idea of display and exhibition. This is a new school in West Bridgewater, and they have a history wall where they show lots of the history of the community. But we also want to be thinking about places where kids can exhibit their work safely and where you can sort of add life to the school. Storage for students. Here's an example of storage that's outside the classroom. So for the older kids, we may be thinking about lockers or cubbies that are outside of the classroom. For the younger kids, we often think about those storage areas that are inside the classroom. We're getting to the end of the list here. Outdoor connections, and in this case, we talked about these outdoor connections not being open to or accessible to the public, but internal to the school. So there are places that kids could be outside that really felt safe and that felt protected by the school. But we want to be thinking about how to use the outdoors. And we want to be thinking about how to engage students in age-appropriate play. So for the younger kids and for the older kids, we're going to have different kinds of play environments. And we want to think about what it feels like when you're inside the school to be walking around, and how do you find your way around. In this school, there are lots of windows that look into the teachers' offices. There's art on the walls. There's light coming in. It's not just the hallway. So it feels like when you're in different parts of the building that you kind of can recognize where you are. Sustainability is about making the building energy efficient. So we want to be thinking about how we site the building, but also the systems. And this has a lot to do with how expensive the building will be over time to heat and cool. A lot of people ask about air conditioning and cooling, and as I said, we're going to be thinking about ways that the building can be used all year round, and so we need to figure out how it might be cooled. And finally, the idea of a roof garden. Particularly if we use this site here, it's a very tight site, and we want to be thinking maybe about ways that we can create some outdoor spaces that might take place on a roof. This is that same school in New Bedford that we saw before. There's a roof garden right outside of the the science classroom and the art classroom. I'm going to hand this over now to Alex, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the site selection criteria that we've been looking at.
Great, thank you, David, for getting us started with this important conversation. Again, my name is Alex Pitkin. I'm an architect with SMMA, joined by my other colleagues here today. And you've heard a lot of words today, and you've seen a fair number of photographs of other successful projects. And so now our important duty is to start to put that at this very important point in time. Within the next month, we're actually going to be making a submission to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, our partner in this exercise. And so we actually start to take all of these words, the important time that's been spent by your principals, by your teachers, by the educational planning team in general, and we've actually cataloged all of those spaces, and we've started to put them into a graphic puzzle, so to speak. So we're going to take all these pieces, and eventually they're going to fit perfectly into what will be your new school. So we don't have to dwell too much on these elements, but I just want you to see the thinking that's going into how we think about organizing the students and the teachers in a very meaningful way going forward. So when we think about the Oliver Partnership School, we're talking about classrooms organized around some of these learning common spaces. We're talking about maybe distributing media center, library type resources closer to the teachers and the students in your particular building. And then some very profound differences when you start looking at the Up Academy, where we start to see the inclusion of science labs into the middle school environment. And having those close at hand, not down at the end of a corridor, but that gets back into that conversation about STEM and STEAM and being very connected across all the different disciplines within the educational program. And then lots of shared spaces in terms of special education. And then there'll be a whole bunch of things that we think about. The next conversation I'm going to have with you is about the site. Can't really do any of this without knowing where we're going to actually place the school. Will it be on this particular site, in this particular building, whether in whole or in part? And so that's going to start to inform how things such as the Up Academy and the Oliver Partnership actually start to connect with the space we have available. What elements are actually shared? How much of the gymnasium space, cafeteria space? We know that the younger students have said they want the older kids kind of away from them, and the older kids probably don't want to be near the younger kids, so organizing that will be an ongoing conversation. But it's still one community of learning. And just different patterns for how we'll be looking at that. And then we're starting to find, really early in the process here, a very real issue of the two programs. How are we going to start to see stacking depending on the site that we actually have available to us? The Up Academy Oliver is only 3 grades, 6, 7, and 8, whereas the Oliver Partnership is that full K through 5 model. And so they're probably not just going to be stacked one on top of another, but do they start to organize in a sort of a bipolar manner? How many floors? 3 floors, 4 floors? Potentially 5 floors. These are all things that we need to get a handle on relatively quickly in the process. So this building in itself has a long history here in the city of Lawrence. It's obviously a beautiful building. It's very important to people in the city. How much of that building is considered historic, whether defined that way by public entities or just locally in the lexicon of the Historic Commission. Those are conversations we're going to have as well. But it has been a place and part of your educational environment for a very long time. This diagram shows the blue is the building that we're in today, and it's bounded by the Campanone Commons, which is also part of a historic district. So the building itself is one thing, and then of course the land upon which it sits is also another part of that historic component. The North Commons Learning Center is just down the block here. And then, of course, to the north side, we have the play fields that are part of the O'Neill Playgrounds. You all are somewhat familiar with the building if you've been through it with your children. Obviously, its conditions are very challenging, not just from the educational perspective, but from a physical aspect of what we need to do to improve them for 21st century learning environments. The space we're in today, you can see this idea that learning happens outside in corridors. How can we better improve to take advantage of every single square foot that the MSBA is going to allow you to build? So for this next phase, we have a few things that the state requires of us. So we have to look at just repairing this building with no additional space. That is a very limited amount of physical work. Renovations, where maybe we can start to take down some walls, do much more incursions into the building, start to influence some of the educational planning that we're talking about today. Additions and renovations. Additions would really require that we take down some of the building. And so those would be dialogues and discussions that we would, once again, have to have within your community. And the goal of an addition renovation would obviously be to get to that full academic discussion that we're having here today. And then all new construction. This is a very limited site, as we've shown you, and it's going to be a challenge. And of course, would the city really let us take the entire building down to build a new building? Well, we have to test that a little bit, but we're seeing that these are the existing 4 floors of the Oliver building. We know that the classrooms are undersized. We know that spaces are tight. That there's not enough toilets in the building, that it doesn't meet the physical and educational challenges. And so we've already started this planning for those code plans, the addition renovation plans, et cetera. And what we're finding is that the site is actually presenting us a fair number of challenges. So here's the existing building. What if we were to take down the north side of the school to create some more space? The city is saying that there are some other parcels that are owned by the city that we may be able to use to expand. Talk about the pieces that are maybe historically significant to the city. And then when we start to add in the program that is important to combine the two schools, you can see that we're looking at a pretty substantial addition, and one that starts to push the building up 5, 6, potentially 7 stories. So that's something that we want to be very cautious about and want to have a very important dialogue with your administration. So the Oliver site is leading us to a series of points that we need to answer. We're not looking at these as negatives or positives just yet, but they do need to be answered. One that's probably on your mind is, well, where do the children go when such a project happens? And that's called swing space. That has not been decided yet, first of all. Excuse me? We're seeing that in the renovations and addition renovations that we may have to talk about the program, that it may be that the entire program of spaces cannot actually fit on this site if we stay here. So what will that mean? Is the demolition acceptable? We talked about that. There are some unique renovation costs with a very constrained, this building also has a very tight vertical footprint. There's obviously no site left over. We talked about roof gardens, we've talked about outdoor learning spaces. Does that mean that we have to take advantage of roofscapes, not just ground floor space? And then this conversation that we'll be having with our partner down at the state. And then what does this building mean for the long-term benefit of the city and for this neighborhood? So some of the buildings that would be in play when we start to talk about swing space, the Oliver School, the North Learning Commons. The city recently has used the St. Mary's School for swing space. No decisions have been made there, but that might be an opportunity for a place to move children off-site while construction is accomplished. The city has also asked us to start to think a little bit outside the box. Is everybody familiar with this building? You may drive by it quite a bit when you come into the city as a gateway building. This is not owned by the city, so this is something that we're really just sort of in the early stages of looking at it so that we can give the city guidance as to whether a school could actually fit within a structure like this. Obviously a very beautiful and dramatic structure. The Oliver School, where we are today, is here. It's called the Stone Mill. It's less than a mile away, so it really is within this catchment area of the neighborhood. The Stone Mill sits behind the large Everett Mill, which will remain as its economic engine that it is for the city. There's also very large parking to the east of the Stone Mill that also comes into play as part of our conversation. So our analysis, same thing. It's a historic building, historic site, so we had to do some investigations there. We had to look at with a much deeper dive on the structure of that, the envelope, which is the skin of the building, the roof of the building, get a better understanding of its condition, and brought in specialty code consultants, site surveys, and environmental investigations. So that's all work that's been done, and we've given those reports to the city for their analysis and use. Just some views of that stone mill. Obviously a very beautiful, robust building. Some beautiful spaces. Probably haven't been inside, but it's got a lot of incredible character. The darker orange is our building. I just wanted to show you a quick sight of, spaces and sites change within communities. You can see all these orange rectangles were buildings that used to exist on that site, and they're all gone now. And so we're left with the stone mill, the Everett Mill, and then the parking lots. One thing that would not fit in a building like that would be a gymnasium. So what we did is we took some of these program elements and we did a really quick analysis of what it would take to put an addition like that onto that structure. And this is then the stacking or the plans. I'm not going to get into those with you just now, but we had to come back to the city and say, can this, all this space that we've been talking about actually fit once you build a gymnasium and a cafetorium? And so we have proven that, that it is capable of fitting in a building like this. But schools are much more than just buildings, right? And so we also wanted to start to talk about what it means from a site planning perspective, right? All of a sudden there's maybe some parking available for teachers and for staff. There's got to be safe and secure places for students, buses, drivers, et cetera, to actually onload and offload. And very importantly to us are those spaces that we talked about, those outdoor learning environments, safe, secure, separated, and there's certainly different kind of opportunities on a site like this than there are on this particular site. And just a couple of images. We had to go a little bit further with this to prove the point. Transportation, we've been talking with the district about what the access zones are and what the current attendance of students, how close they are to the existing Oliver School, and there'll be more analysis about how that mapping works. Obviously, children will change from year to year as to who's in the building, but that would be something that we want to make sure that we can answer questions about the transportation component of this. So the next steps on the stone mill is to kind of continue this dialogue with the city. And these particular considerations, we know that it's an iconic piece of architecture. Should it be, first of all, purchased and used as a school versus being used as a private entity? Does it have a positive impact on the entrance to the city? It has purchase costs, has unique renovation costs, potential schedule impacts. The site program obviously offers us something very different as a comparison. Parking, traffic, mobility, and then our negotiations with the MSBA and discussing some kind of a program like this. How will they react to that? We're going to find that out soon. And then site environmental and any political ramifications for this. So there's a lot of things to think about when a city or a town starts to consider that kind of a move. When we started to look at that, we've also been talking with the city about the fact that the city will own all of that parking space in a very short time. That is going to be transferred over to the city as part of an agreement that's been ongoing for some time. And so this is the stone mill, and this is what sort of our last analysis here for you today, which is the MSBA also wants to test a new building option. And so what we did is we wanted to take that program that I just showed you in the stone mill and actually see, could we put a new building that would be more rational, 3-4 stories, and actually place it on the edge of the parking lot, create a new gateway opportunity for the city, and what would that do for open space and for access, again, since it's basically still right on the edge of that neighborhood. And so we're looking at a couple of ways of thinking about that for the city as well. So these are all, there's no answers here yet, but it would be really good for people to hear your first impressions about some of the challenges that we're going to be facing going forward.